if they taught only like one specific like political angle about China or like the Soviet Union or whatever, and I like came out of high school very dogmatically believing one thing, um, that's what I'm against, right? I would just prefer no education as opposed to that kind of education.
Google is launching a new initiative called Prebunking. This aims to counter online disinformation by distributing videos that show common tactics used in conspiracy theories. This has been contrasted against traditional debunking as a solution that is less labor intensive and avoids triggering an individual's political defense mechanisms. Do you think that this is a positive development? Even if you agree with the initiative, is a tech company like Google the proper messenger for this? Or is this another attempt by the elite to control the narrative? So yeah, I read an article from the AP about this. Google is like, I think they said in Eastern Europe is where they launched this, and just like giving, it's like basically like giving people like bite-sized chunks of lessons about like critical thinking and like media literacy, that type of stuff, right? So that's kind of what they're aiming for, so that people will be less susceptible to conspiracy theories in the first place, which, you know, if a person has actually gone down that road, is a very difficult thing to reverse. So yeah, what do you think about this? Or is this somehow insidious as well? Start with Lactoid.
Yeah, so generally, I have no issue with people putting out their own content to try and teach people how to critically think, especially about things like the next topic. But if you support this, it would seem to indicate that giant corporate overlords like Google can do a better job at teaching critical thinking than our public education system. If you don't support this, it's probably because you are skeptical that Google, the organization that actively discourages true information against certain political positions, will be able to honestly pre-bunk things in an equitable manner. And that's where my skepticism is. I hope my skepticism is shown to be wrong, because there's nothing wrong with the principle of it, but I'd be surprised if it's not.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Scott.
Yeah, so initially it seems like a good idea, right? Like, who wouldn't want, you know, someone just paying ads to teach people that like fear mongering, scapegoating, false comparisons, exaggerating, and missing context, quote unquote, are a good thing, right? Like you would think that that would be good, but I had an initial skepticism as well, because I'm like, so we have this giant corporation that works with the state that wants to do ads to tell us like how to identify conspiracy theories, right? And it's like, well, you know, there's a current conspiracy theory that's been going on for 2 years, and that is, well, it's less of a conspiracy theory and more of just wrong, right? That like masks work, for example, right? Like anyone that understood science knew that that was bullshit. And of course, the Cochrane study, or the Cochrane Review, comes out with randomized control trials and shows that, you know, hey, everyone that knew science knew that masks were bullshit. Hey, we have more proof that masks are bullshit. And you have like the CDC director coming out. So I wonder, it's like, well, that's like a thing that needs to be debunked. Like, is Google going to engage with like, you know, corporate talking points and government talking points, and understanding that missing context is often, you know, skeptics, you know, in science that is healthy? Or is it going to be, you know, more trust the narrative? So I did a little research and I was like, hey, well, let's look this up. Well, the people that run it is Jigsaw Research underneath Alphabet Corporation, run by Beth Goldberg, who's in many of these articles talking about it. And you know what? They already have an English version of Prebunking that you can easily look at YouTube if you just type in Jigsaw Research Prebunking. In it is a 33-second ad about why you need to get the COVID vaccine, and why anyone that thinks that you shouldn't get the COVID vaccine are fear-mongering crazy people. And they put nice, happy music behind it. And then they say that the vaccine is that you are 1,000 times more likely to die in a car accident than you are to have a serious adverse effect from the vaccine. I was like, well, that number seems crazy. Let me look it up. Oh, well, according to the CDC's own numbers, not VAERS reports, not uncaptured data, just what the CDC is saying, 5 people per million doses go into anaphylaxis, right? Which is, given the fact that we have 613 million doses in the United States is 3,000 plus people that have had this one specific serious adverse effect where they will fucking die if someone doesn't give them something to stop it, such as an epinephrine or adrenaline shot or something like that. Well, according to them, only 46 people per year, looking at car accidents, 46,000, have any serious effects at all. That includes death and every reaction. So they're off by an order of a magnitude of over 100 times based off of just one thing, based off of the CDC's number. So their pre-bunking video is you need to trust the narrative, trust the science. Oh, and by the way, we're going to engage in false comparisons, exaggeration, and missing context. So no, pre-bunking is just Google trying to get you to do exactly what the state wants you to do.
Thank you so much, Corey.
Okay. So I kind of lost my train of thought there. Yeah, so in principle, I am not, let's say, totally opposed to it, but I share some concerns that have been aired already by, let's say, Lactoid. In terms of, like, I think it's a good question to ask of, like, who do we trust more, the companies or our public education system? As in, I'd be all in favor of some sort of media literacy course that needs to be taken in our public education system. But pretty much to answer the question of, like, you know,
Yeah,
I perceive misinformation and disinformation as a problem, a large societal or global problem. And the question is, how do you address that? At least I think it needs to be something that needs to be addressed. Do I think that this is a potential thing to try out? Yes, I am absolutely open to that. I can see a potential use for this. But again, I share some of the concerns. And again, there might be better ways to address misinformation and disinformation. But I think this is, let's say, a decent experiment to run. But again, I would actually rely on the public education system to hopefully empower people to combat misinformation, disinformation themselves. And I'll leave it there for now.
Let's go to Griffin.
Yeah, so what Lactoid said was really interesting as far as not trusting the American education system. Well, I guess I'm in America, but this is a global thing, as you said. It started in Europe. And I would say, no, I don't trust the American education system to educate people, like, at all, as far as many topics goes. Like I said, if you watch any of me on these previous streams, I used to be a really rigid religious conservative because I grew up in the Bible Belt for a very long period of my adolescence. And, like, it gave me these, like, hardline positions. I was convinced that the Bible was, like, correct because it's what I learned about in school. We learned about, like, fucking creationism alongside evolution alongside evolution as a theory for, like, human, you know, fucking
Might be
human
telling
progress.
the truth just because he
And
used
that
the
kind
word
of stuff.
evolutionism.
Is it something that we could agree on is ready to properly teach people about critical thinking as far as
Actually
media
believe him
consumption
now.
goes? Because it within itself would have to be a challenge to the very system that you're learning in. So I do think we need to either A, reevaluate how we go about teaching in schools in general and establish a general standard to eliminate the need for this kind of pre-bunking thing in the first place, or B, do rely on an outside entity if we are going to revolutionize the American education system. I share similar concerns as Fabian, although not specifically about COVID, because I do believe that if we look at the excess mortality rates of the country, since the COVID pandemic was announced to be an official pandemic, there is a correlative amount of evidence between conservatives and people who do not wear masks and attend large gatherings and refuse to get vaccinated and excess mortalities. I do believe that is something that we can see a direct correlation between, right? I'm not making that up. Is that not true? I don't know. I'll let Fabian respond when we get there. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna let you respond to that when we get to the open discussion. But those are my concerns. That when it comes down to it, the quote unquote left, and especially when it comes to America, it's still very much center right. And so when it comes to what is painted as conspiracy or exaggeration, that kind of thing is not and will never be free of bias. There's always going to be someone putting their own personal inferences on what these people say when they never put something out that's quote unquote misinformation. So I am skeptical, and I do believe that something like this cannot be done purely from a perspective of a corporation. It does need, I believe, heavy civilian oversight. I would say government, but at this point, I'm pretty sure Google is government oversight as far as this kind of thing is concerned. But that's my opening.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Michael.
When the commie is accidentally right.
Yeah, so if you've ever studied the history of rhetoric in the world. One person you might have come across is the late Roman philosopher, late Roman Republic philosopher, Cicero. And Cicero was known for something called the digressio, or what we now call the Ciceronian digression. And it's when he would be in the middle of a speech and all of a sudden he would start to recount points that he thinks an opponent might make. And he would usually do 3 of them. And he would go on a pretty long digression over those. And that was essentially what we're talking about here. It was his version of prebunking, or what we've long called an intellectual inoculation, where you get introduced to the idea in small doses, you get introduced to what the flaws of that idea might be, so that when they come up, and you'll see this often in debates, you'll hear someone say, my opponent will say this, this, and this. And the reason people do that is so that you can skip a couple steps in terms of what the answer might be to that thing. It forces your opponent to go more in depth defending that idea, or maybe abandoning that idea if it doesn't work. We use that in academic debate as well, and it's often known as what's called a time suck in debate, which is to say you're saying something in a short period of time that forces your opponent to spend more time defending that position. All of those things are benefits of what's being called a pre-bunk here. And yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it's effective. And I think it forces like all sides to come closer to the facts in terms of what they're saying.
Thank you. And Joe Lewis, please.
We should mandate internet literacy from at least starting from 3rd grade. And if states don't comply, they should get their funds stripped away. That's my take.
Thank you so much. That's why he's so valuable, right? He's efficient. All right, let's go to our friend Bam.
No Ciceronian digression there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that media literacy in general is something that you're seeing like clearly is something I don't think anyone could predict how poor it is in the country, regardless of what position on whatever issue you want to go to. I think that's something that like generally is agreed to, like, oh, okay, people will believe a lot of weird stuff if you tell them that. So yeah, I think the idea of pre-bunking, like, I don't think it's a solution, but I think it's probably a decent band-aid on the idea of like, oh, okay, we're about, whenever you're dealing with a controversial topic, like, let's go ahead and let's pre-release facts on what something is, because most people are going to most people aren't going to do their research. That's not very few people actually do that thing. They watch YouTube videos, they watch Facebook videos, they may read something that their close friend like happened to post, but they're not going into hours and hours unless they have something that they personally gain out of it, whether that be clout or money, etc. So like, I guess like whenever you're dealing with an issue that may come with some level of controversy, like pre-releasing the facts and letting that be one of the early things that the general public can look through, and not necessarily forming opinions about it, seems to be pretty useful. And like I said, some general tips related to how to navigate through information,
So mean.
And how to see when conspiracies come about.
So
yeah, I'm in favor.
DB?
I think that I half agree with Bam. Right? I think it is a good band-aid, but it's obviously not a good solution, I think, long term. I think that there are like some positives associated with this. In the lead up to this, I watched a lot of pre-bunking videos that are on YouTube that they were like putting up as ads before like political videos. And I guess the idea is that, hey, if you teach people to like look out for this kind of manipulation, before they encounter that manipulation, they're going to be on the lookout, so they won't be as vulnerable to it. But I think some of the downsides to something like this is something like what Jewish people deal with, right? So people talk a lot about, hey, the Jews, this happened to them in the Holocaust and yada yada, and you shouldn't talk about this because this is anti-Semitic and yada yada yada, and in a lot of ways, the pushback or the attempt to pre-bunk or to dismiss conspiracy theories before they formulated in somebody's head makes somebody curious as to why there's so much attention there. Why are you trying so hard to keep me from looking under that rock, basically? And I think this is something that for a lot of people that I've run into online over the years, at least, has absolutely led them to believe that there's some kind of deep, dark, esoteric knowledge there that they're not supposed to know, and they're told to stay away from it. And they're told that it's bad because it's true, right? So I think that's like one of the few downfalls that I can find with like pre-bunking. So I think long term, it makes a lot more sense to just focus on the reasons these conspiracy theories exist in the first place. A lot of times these people aren't really nefarious actors, the people who genuinely believe this. So deal with the reasons they genuinely believe it, right? So I think that makes a lot more sense long term, but that's obviously like a lot more complicated.
All right, back to the panel.
Yeah, I think that people are like, some people are generally contrarians. Like it's because it makes for more interesting stories. So like, there's people who form positions that you're not going to be able to reason them out of to begin with, and those people are absolutely lost. Like, but I think that there's a lot of people that can be a lot of people who just don't feel like it's worth their time and energy to go down and do deep research on whatever topic you feel like. They form their opinion based on like whatever source they see first, and that was basically it. And I think that these people are like, I think we should make efforts to not necessarily take control, but
we should legislate them out of existence.
Thanks.
I don't think
so. I don't think
you can do it.
You think that?
Of course you can.
I mean, you can, but that's a 50-year issue. That doesn't help somebody.
Like, and this is and we got here on like a multi-decade problem, so it's gonna require a multi-decade solution. So yeah, legislate the shit out of it.
Sure, but I'm saying, but you have to do. I think you have to do something in between.
Like legislate.
How do you legislate?
Yeah, you create a culture in the education system where people have proper literacy around the environment that they're in. Like, we're in a digital age, so it's unacceptable that the education system has not caught up to that yet. You know.
Yeah, but I don't think that fully
Shit's
like
unacceptable.
encompasses the problem. So you could take something as, I mean, I used to Jews earlier, but I mean, we could use like people who believe in like race IQ shit, right? And believe that like
directly
that
debunk that, maybe. Like, you can when you do an IQ test, right? You can isolate.
yeah.
things
So
off-
I know that we can like debunk it directly, but
that's-
what I'm saying is that people who fall down these kind of rabbit holes, typically it's not because they're just like too far gone and
We don't have
they're
education
like
for it.
they're like racist and evil or something. It's they genuinely think it's true. They've been presented with a set of facts, quote unquote, that lead them to a conclusion, and they get to that conclusion, and then they see all these things in the background that are telling them that, hey, stay away from that conclusion, it's bad. But they don't know enough about how even how the studies that were put together that got them to that conclusion. They don't know enough about all that works to even what's what I'm looking for. To even like
studies.
Yeah, they're not.
Yeah,
again,
wait,
it's the
no,
same
that's
thing
not
I'm
true.
saying.
Hold on, plenty
Like,
of
they
race
don't have the
realists,
contextual
deep race
understanding
realists,
for the
like
things they
read
understand.
studies. Like that's
Yes, the deep
This
ones,
isn't-
but no,
isn't
that's what I'm
rocket
saying.
science.
When you concern yourself with the deep ones, like you're not dealing with like the people who, like the general public who believes these positions. People,
So-
like I said, people aren't like going through they're doing tons of research to form these opinions.
So
They're watching a YouTube.
yeah, but if you
This
don't
is-
deal with those
so
guys,
this is-
like
so
you're
this
never
is-
going to get
So-
to the rest of them because
so this
they're the ones that are leading the rest of them to that position.
So this isn't a problem of like educating people enough to have critical thinking skills, because some people will never have deep critical thinking skills, no matter how much you fucking educate them. And if you try and act like that's not
still not
true, that's just not true. Like,
Yeah, but you said we have to have a culture of education around it.
But
We
listen,
don't have that.
the reason people fall into things like race IQ or anti-Semitism or certain things is because because the taboo nature of the topic creates a Gnosticism, right?
No.
When
No.
listen, when
Let
you
me
say
cook, Griffin. It takes a while.
it's I'm not coping just because I'm fucking making an argument, Joe.
No, I'm just
So
saying you
when-
talk a lot. That's it.
So when you say like, look, we can't talk about racial IQ, and talking about racial IQ is racist, and then there's a group of people that says we'll talk about it, right? You have one group of
Right.
people that refuse to discuss, the topic openly and debunk things, and you have another group that says we're speaking truth to power. Those people want to silence you. We have the secret knowledge, and what ends up happening is you end up taking something that is wrong and something that is a racist belief, and you end up pairing it to people that are brave and willing to say the truth that no one else will say, because
Exactly.
we don't because it becomes a taboo subject that our culture doesn't want to debunk and fight back against.
I'm sorry. So here's my biggest disagreement with that, right? The only way you are susceptible to that kind of thing in the first place is if you were not taught critically as a kid what the differences between races are. If you don't understand from a historical context that race is a social construct, that's something that you can entirely
Hold on.
get rid of. What?
uh,
What do you mean? What
Just-
do you mean?
No,
So
well,
if we
keep
just have
cooking,
enough
Griffin. Keep cooking,
CRT
Griffin.
fucking training, then
Fuck
like then we
off.
won't have
Just
this
keep cooking,
problem.
Griffin.
We'll fix the problem.
Yeah, hold on, Griffin.
First
So
off, stop.
I don't.
Wait. No, let me
Good
finish my thought.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I don't. First off, if you think fucking CRT and thinking that race is a literal non-existent concept, you know that biologists don't classify humans as black and white, right? They use fucking a bimodal scale, right? Like you understand that. I hope you
I'm
don't
fully aware.
actually.
I'm fully aware
So
of the
why
difference
would-
between race and ethnicity
So why the fuck would you act like we can't teach
and
sexual
clients
children
and
growing up?
things like that.
So why can't you? So why do you act like we can't teach the children?
Because you're saying that we can engineer people to have the right
Not
ideas.
engineering.
and-
We're not
and
engineering. Stop. I don't want
You're
you to
literally
go-
saying that. Like you're saying,
No,
if we
Well,
just educate people enough and we have enough control over their education as they grow up, they won't develop these ideas later. And that's just simply not how people work.
It is how
Well, I
people
mean,
work.
related
And
to
you
race and
provide-
IQ, it is. This
Yeah,
is a
like,
very
this-
online
okay.
topic. Like
Yeah.
even like racist
No, that's
white-
not true.
Even hyper racist white people will make the argument it's not genetics. Like it's actually fuels their racism. They're like it's not black people aren't worse off because they're genetic. It's because they're like their culture teaches them to be lazy.
Yeah.
Like no one like the race IQ thing isn't mainstream.
No, I don't think that's true. I think most like racists, like actual racists that I've ever run into or communicated with or just heard about in the real world, right? These people, they're probably not going to get into deep debate lord mode, right, and talk about the fucking studies about race and IQ.
Someone's gonna say,
but they're going to
Klein
say that black people are less intelligent than white people, just like naturally, genetically. They're so
Right.
whether or not they know this is what they're doing, this is what they're doing.
But that's where it comes from. We in America do not have a universal system of history teaching. We just seen issues with states like Texas and fucking Florida not properly teaching. Fuck, in my school, we didn't even teach how slavery actually happened. We didn't even, you know how many people I have met that unironically did not understand that there were nations in Africa and that they assumed they just caught black people with nets.
Oh,
and
that
what-
triggers the fuck out
Hey,
of me.
Mr.
I've run into a lot of
Griffin,
those.
I just
stuff.
have a
It does-
quick question.
what-
Can you name a school system in America that teaches flat Earth?
That's
Can you
my
name
point.
one?
That's
No,
literally the point. That's
No,
literally
yeah.
my point.
Can you name one?
No, that's the point.
So
is because
then
we
why is it that everyone is taught the truth about the heliocentric model of the universe, and yet adults, after having been informed of the truth, develop these ideas about flat
there
Earth?
was a
But I think
precedent
it seems to be
because-
overwhelmingly successful. I think far more people now believe in round Earth than ever before in history.
and not to mention there
That
was a
doesn't-
precedent.
that's irrelevant.
But,
No,
but
it
you're,
isn't
we're
irrelevant
arguing
because
for a
we're trying to change
non-zero
the
number.
Yeah. Like, piggyback off Bam, and to respond to you, there was a precedent for a long amount of time, for like thousands of years, not thousands of years, I would say like maybe 600 years, in which it was actively considered against the church to believe of like certain theories about the planet shifting, things of that nature. There, you have to battle an entirely different set of history when it comes to this kind of thing. Race realism and like these kind of arguments are relatively new in comparison to the geography of the planet. So I feel like you're comparing apples and oranges in a way that doesn't really
No,
come
it
together
actually
because-
strengthens my argument because we've
No,
known
it
for
doesn't.
so much longer that the Earth is not fucking flat, and yet, and our education systems tell people all of the things that they need to know about shadows, about like seeing ships disappear from a very young age. They're given all of the information that they need to do this, and yet that there's still a lure, right, of censorship and bias in the way that we have conversations, where people are drawn in by this idea of secret knowledge. And what I'm saying is that you cannot engineer people with enough critical thinking skills to where there will not be a subset of the population that is not taken in by that lure.
Okay,
But
talking about,
hold on.
like,
and I think that
I want to, because I feel like what you guys are arguing isn't critical thinking skills, right? Like at least how you described it, Griffin, because how you described it sounds like, well, if we give the facts, right? And that's a person memorizing data, but that's not
No.
like being able to take in new information, process it, and output like something novel, or understand like a break or do the opposite, and in which you break down information into constituent parts and that stuff.
So I get what you're saying, and my only real like clarification, I guess, to counter your point is what I'm saying isn't about keeping people with the facts more say, it's more about the framework. We have to understand the frame of how people came to be where they are in order for you to develop these kind of thoughts. The issue I had with Fabian earlier is that he can talk about how everyone in school is taught about how the earth is round, but not everyone in school is taught the history of like fucking chattel slavery in America or the truth about colonization. So at the very jump, you can't compare the fucking history of the earth being considered round versus like race realists because we haven't even established a universal system of teaching yet.
I can, and I
Let's go to-
proved what you were saying wrong.
Let's go to Lactoid. Aiko, did you have your hand up?
I
Like-
did, yeah.
Alpha Palms, buddy. All right, so there we go. Lactoid, Aiko, Doobie, and anyone else? Okay.
I'll be on the end of it if you want.
Okay, cool, Joel.
Cool.
Griffin, I
I'll
noticed
just
you said
interrupt
something-
randomly.
I,
Cool. Thanks, Fabian.
Fuck
It's
yeah.
new thing.
Griffin, I actually have you said something interesting that I want to point out. When you said when it comes to the heliocentric, or sorry, I guess the geocentric universe, you said, well, this was something that the Catholic Church had reinforced going back, for 1,000 years. And to me, what I heard is this large institutional power backed a false statement and pushed it as ideology for thousands of years, and it turned out to be wrong, and we had to undo it. Now, I have no problem when it comes to like teaching how to think, right? But from what Scott said, based on the video that he watched, this isn't just how to think and how to question. It's more they give you facts, right? They gave specific facts about the ratio of
Which were
acute
wrong.
events. Yeah, acute events to car accidents.
Google
which-
engaged in misinformation.
Well, and that was blatantly wrong. So you kind of similar to the Catholic Church, you have a large institution that is directly pushing false information on people. I mean, aren't you concerned that if they continue doing this might create problems down the road that we have to undo, like teaching people, like undoing the geocentric universe myth? We also have to undo this acute COVID incident myth as well.
In my opening, I literally said that I consider Google and large corporations doing this to just be forms of government censorship and control, because I consider most of these people to be directly center right leaning. There's no way that they would accurately present things like if you would talk about the Ukraine scenario or other hot button issues, they wouldn't present those anywhere past like a neoconservative viewpoint. I actively admitted that in my opening, so I hope that we were in the same point in there.
All right,
Can I get a
very cool.
clarification real quick? You think Google is center right?
Yes, it's a large multinational corporation.
Don't even need to debate that. I'm just gonna let
So
people
is
laugh at
CNN.
that. Yeah.
Let's go to. Aiko.
There's so many lines of reasoning that here that could like totally take us off topic, so I'm not going to address those. But I do want to address something that I heard a couple times now. I think at least once from Doobie and once or twice from Fabian, and that is this idea of like these I guess debunkable ideas being addressable and yet banned and dismissed, put outside of what should be in conversation. I don't think prebunking does that. I think prebunking does the opposite. It engages, or it seeks to engage. And this is the choice that NASA was faced with. I remember about 20 years ago, like NASA had to reverse itself on a position to say that at first, and for decades, NASA said, we're not going to like engage in this stupid flat earth stuff because it's not worth talking about. It doesn't need to be in the discourse. It's obviously laughable and shouldn't be, we shouldn't dignify it with an answer. And then about 20 years ago, they decided, you know what, that's not working. Because nobody's answering this stuff because nobody wants to dignify it with an answer. And so NASA decided it was going to sort of pre-bunk these ideas, put it out there for people. And so they were like, okay, but they were also addressing like the moon landing stuff. And like, so they started answering all of the like common objections to why the moon landing never happened and stuff like that. And that was the opposite of refusing to engage or dismissing something without engaging in it. This pre-bunking stuff is about how to engage, and especially how to engage before you ever come across these ideas. It's not supposed to be about the idea itself. It's supposed to be about the processes that these conspiracy theories sort of rely upon in order to get there. And then you can sort of recognize it on your own. And that's really what I wanted to address, was that this is a way to give somebody the tools so that they themselves can can come up with explanations for these things when they come across them, and not just
can I just real quick
an authority.
That's the claim.
Real quick,
true,
can we
right?
separate what Jigsaw research is doing and the idea of pre-bunking, because I feel like I've already shown that like Jigsaw research is not doing pre-bunking. What they are doing is actively debunking things and then trying to label it as pre-bunking while supporting a certain state-run corporate narrative, right? Versus the general idea of just being like, here's what this logical fallacy looks like. Here's some examples from the past that aren't necessarily problematic right now where you can see what that looks like. Because I love the idea of pre-bunking. I love that idea. I just don't trust
Jigsaw
Google.
doing it.
I don't think Google's going to do that, and I don't think they're going to do it well. And I think that they've already kind of shown a predisposition and a bias to not do that and to actively engage in misinformation themselves.
So what's an alternative that you would find acceptable?
There are plenty of actual pre-bunking videos on Google if you just search pre-bunking videos, right?
What?
That the market can perfectly give to people, and that individuals can choose to watch. If
Then
it's
how can we
something that
trust
they
the
want.
how can we trust the market if we're using Google?
What?
You just said do you have skepticism with Google? Is that the claim
Yes,
earlier that you
obviously.
brought up? Okay, so then why are we using Google to find about things about pre-bunking?
I don't
this
know if
case?
you know this, but like Rumble exists, right? Like
You
there are
mentioned Google
companies
that you
other
can.
than Apple.
You mentioned that you can go on. Am I getting
Alphabet.
gaslit right now? You mentioned Google as a means to find out these videos, right? Is that what you said? Like, there's plenty of
Yes.
other options. You can go on Google. So why are we using the same website or the same like umbrella that you just said you're skeptical about?
I have no problem with these videos being on Rumble. I have no
You have no
problem.
problem. Wait, but do you have a problem with them being on Google?
I don't have a problem with Google's existence. I have a problem with like certain ways that they engage with the state. I have
So then, how could you trust their? I don't know. We can move on. I'm questioning your inconsistency of skepticism. I don't think it's a dunk. I don't understand what the fuck you're talking about. I'm trying to clarify, but
Joe,
it's getting more confused as you go.
address Ico too.
Maybe Ico can help me or somebody like.
Yeah, look, here's something that confused me about your answer there just for a minute, Fabian, because I heard you use the word market and perfect in the same sentence, that the market solution that has a perfect solution to this. Google is part of the market, and maybe they have too much power, they need to be broken up, or
we don't have
they're
a free
distorting the
market, so
somewhat.
there's no such thing as a perfect
Well, you
market
didn't say free
unless
market,
you're
you just said
talking about
markets.
an evenly rotating economy.
You said
which will never
to
exist.
engage in the market, right?
Yeah.
Fabian. So then Google's part of that market, but you have skepticism for Google as that market. So how can we have a free and open market of ideas if Google is a participant of that market?
Great question. Abolish the state.
What the fuck? All right, we can move on.
Okay,
Then we can have a free
That-
market.
It's actually a reasonable
It's gonna
response.
do- it's
though.
gonna
Can
give you-
I-
Oh, sorry.
Hold on to that.
I'll
I
let you
tried,
jump in.
I tried.
I'll let you jump in right now, but then I gotta go do it because he's been waiting patiently.
Well, as much as I appreciate abolishing the state, I think even if we didn't do that, maybe a good solution could be that the videos that are being put out should not take a position consistent with Section 230. So the videos themselves are not like, hey, insert false thing about adverse effects of car accidents. Instead, what it should be is like, this is, XYZ logical fallacy. Here's like a really broken down example of how this works. And here's like, old examples of why when you do this fallacy,
Exactly.
you can think you're getting to the right answer, but in reality, you're getting to the wrong answer. And so just educating people on those specific fallacies. So when they go in and they get new inputs, regardless of like the political slant of those inputs, they know like, okay, are they engaging in these fallacies? Right?
Let's
I
go
don't
to
think
Doobie.
that's a legit way to do it with humans. Yeah, my bad.
Doobie, then Joe, then Bam.
So yeah, I agree with Lactoid actually. I'm not aware of this Jigsaw research.
Bitch, I said
thing.
it first.
Okay, I agree with you too. Okay, but I'm not aware of this Jigsaw research thing. I didn't find any of those videos, but I've seen stuff like that before from other companies that I don't know their names. Maybe it was Jigsaw research, but I've seen these sorts of things where they like try to debunk, right? And label it as pre-bunking. But when I was looking up like videos of pre-bunking and discussions about it earlier, the videos that I was seeing was like, hey, here's this video with a little girl and there's scary music playing in the background. If you're seeing this, they're probably trying to manipulate you. Hey, here's whatchamacallit? Fuck, what was the other thing? Here's an argument. Do you see how it's incoherent? Yeah, make sure that if someone's giving you an argument or telling you to believe something, make sure that it's consistent, right? That it makes sense, right? And they have like a little devil guy trying to sell you the scary idea, right? And they're just trying to break down like how to find these fallacies and whatnot. So I think things like that could be like really useful for people. Like even in something as simple as like the thing with the scary music in the background or the sad piano music. Oh yeah, if they're playing this in the background while they're telling you this fact, or they show you this meme, that they're probably trying to manipulate you somewhere. So be aware of this. But I feel like that only works on like really old people who've never been on the internet. Like I maybe like I don't know, maybe I have too much hope in humanity or whatever, right? But I feel like most young people, when they see a video and they see like the sad music playing in the background with the dark lighting, they know that this is like someone's trying to sell them some shit.
In the arms of
yeah.
the angel.
Just make the ads unskippable.
To Griffin's point earlier, it wasn't really Griffin's point. I just say everybody, but I think we make an excuse when or not an excuse, a mistake when we think of these people as unintelligent or lacking critical thinking skills. Because I mean, Prime, you've interacted with some of these flat earther types before. They're not unintelligent people. They're very smart people. A lot of them, right? They actually devote a lot of time to figuring out this conspiracy theory, right, about the Earth being flat and why it's being hidden and all this kind of shit. They'll go through all the math with you. They'll show you all these stupid pictures and videos that they have on command. Like they've done a ton of fucking research a lot of the times, right? So they're not idiots, and they are doing. In fact, they're probably doing more critical thinking about that topic than the average person does about the fact that the world is around at any point in their fucking lives, right? Because most people they hear this like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, I remember the cartoon I saw in kindergarten. Yeah, that makes sense. It's round. And that's it. That's the extent of their research, right, into the topic. Maybe they'll do like the shadow thing with a candle or whatever to like try to reinforce it or whatever. But these people are like deep diving, like fucking angles and fisheye lenses and all this kind of shit.
Lenses.
Yeah. So I think we're making a mistake when we think of them as like lacking critical thinking and unintelligent. I think the issue is just that yes.
Doobie, this is the problem with Gnostic beliefs. Right? Like once someone takes a spiritual belief that they have a secret knowledge that other people don't have, it's actually the smarter they are, the deeper they go into an ideology.
Right.
You see the same thing with communists or people that believe in CRT, right? Is that they believe they have a secret knowledge that like society is all about class warfare and the bourgeoisie. And like you ask, like, for example, I'll give you an example of like CRT, right? So like they have this Gnostic religious belief that is false, and no amount of data will ever prove their religious belief wrong. So if you ask someone that's kind of dumb, that like is kind of woke, why toothpaste is racist, they'll be like, I don't get it. Toothpaste isn't racist because it's obvious that toothpaste isn't racist. But if you ask like a super smart person that's, like if you were to ask Ibram X. Kendi and he felt like answering questions that day, he often doesn't. But if you were to ask him, he'd probably say something about like fluoride and like the drinking water in low socioeconomic status communities and how black people are given too much because of the toothpaste industry, and the idea that like whiteness is to be seen as pure, and like we sell whitening products because we believe that whiteness is beautiful instead of the natural color, and so like black people are being harmed by environmental racism that includes the government forcing poison into the drinking water and then doubling down with toothpaste, and that's why toothpaste is racist. Because he has a knowledge that white supremacy is the answer to all of the fucking problems. And then from that point on, the smarter he is, the more he can fit it into a fucking box that goes off of his preconceived notions.
Okay. I have a question.
Guys, before you,
love God, don't engage with that.
So what Scott did, right, is what I've decided, right? I just now decided is the bait and club, right? He baits you in with sweetness, right? Like something you might agree with, and then he literally clubs you over the head and makes you regret ever listening to what he ever said.
I mean, my favorite cadence in the army was clubbing the baby seals.
I know it. All right, well, thank you. Dude, do you have anything else to say? Then we're going to Joe, Bam, and Corey, and I go.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Scott. I've spoken to fewer CRT people than I have like Holocaust deniers, right? And even there, the level one is like, oh, you saw a few memes or infographics on 4chan that tell you that the Jews were bad, so the Holocaust didn't happen. But then the deeper you go, the more intelligent a person is, they will fucking go through the logistics of like transporting the coke to the crematoriums, how much fucking ash does a human body leave behind when it's fully cremated? They'll go through like step by step into fucking wild shit that if you don't know anything about this topic, if you haven't done your own research, they're gonna make you look stupid, right? Even if they're wrong, just because they've gone to such depths to try to prove that this is true, because they know it's true and they know that the truth is being hidden from them. So Scott is totally right.
Yeah. Let's go to it's Joe, Bam, Corey, I go.
Yeah, generally, I just hear just a more stronger case why we had to federally mandate the curriculum that exists in all public schools, and just do it in such a way where you assist school districts in the funding of it, and just include just like the basics things. And this is why I've just been hearing, like, we need a better understanding of like the ethical production of information. We need a better understanding of like the economic, social, and legal issues as it relates to that information, like better access to peer-reviewed materials and digital library resources, fucking like just an education system that helps understand the differences between facts, opinions, and point of views, and just a bunch of other things. Like, so there's students that go through like all of K through 12 and have no idea what primary and secondary sources are. And it's like, that's got to stop. And we got to recognize that, you know, like if all of these things that we are talking about are something we should take seriously, then the education has to take it seriously. And the federal government is the only option in this case, because these districts need help. And unless you have some other idea to help fund and expand not only teacher training, but also just making sure that districts have the sustainability for these, because it's not only going to exist within a topic or curriculum of media literacy, it's going to expand outward into other topics like history, science, etc.
Let's go to sorry, excuse me. Let's go to Bam and then Aiko.
Yeah, I think that so there's a couple of things. Number one, based off of the article, like, I don't know the exact way they plan on implementing it, but it seems like, at least based on their tester related to Ukraine, I think it seems that it's not necessarily teaching general skills. It seems like they're connecting it to a specific topic, and it didn't say that they were necessarily giving the other side's arguments, like and like debunking them. It seems like they were basically giving like a Wikipedia or a mini Wikipedia version of like basic information related to an issue. I don't know if this is the proper and improper way to do it, but I do think that it's sort of missing people if you believe that you're going to be able to, like, before any topic, properly explain and like implement the way for an average person to apply fallacies to a discussion, like to a video or a topic. Like, I just don't think that that's something. I don't think that's something that the average citizen is going to be able to properly engage with. You probably would get more use out of just, okay, what is the topic we're discussing? Without picking a side, what are some general facts related to this? What are some general, like, vague pieces of misinformation that seem to be that may become popular, things that have been out there, and just letting people engage from there. Because I think that we have like weird expectations of people. Even the Doobie and Fabian, like, and Lectoid, I think all three of y'all have made this argument for this argument, like, that deals with this extreme person. It deals with the person that's like 4 levels deep, the person that's watched 17 documentaries related to it, person that can tell you, like, do the math related to flat earth. Like, I don't believe that appealing to this person as the common denominator is useful to any of the topics you're trying to deal with. Like I said, generally, like, related to the idea of flat earth in general, I believe that we actually have been pretty successful in dealing with the issue, even if we know that some people exist to still have the opinion of flat earth. I'd say it's probably less than 1 in 1,000, probably closer to 1 in 10,000.
According to a New Hampshire survey, it's 10%, but that's a survey of 1,000 people.
So
I think in some ways those are the most important ones to engage with.
That's not that
high.
They're like
less than people that are young Earth creationists.
1 out of 10 Come on. But that's not, hold on. The flat Earth's not even in the Bible, okay?
Well, Lactoid, when I go outside, Lactoid,
Four
it
corners.
looks pretty flat to me. Okay, fuck you.
Bible
So-
says four corners.
But Bam, I think in some ways, like those people, like the very deep, into the weeds people, are in some ways the most important people to deal with because they're the ones that are pulling on the rest. They're like the Pied Pipers, right?
But
They're the ones that are going out there
to
saying,
correct
"Hey,
them.
I have the esoteric knowledge. People don't want you to know about this." We used to have this problem in my Discord server all the time. We used to call them Nazi wizards because they show up when people weren't around to challenge them, talk to young guys, pull them off to their server saying, "Hey, I can't really talk about this stuff here. Let's go off to my server where I can be open about this." And then they get pulled into a fucking like Nazi echo chamber. Right, and then they'll be like, "Hey, yeah, they're not gonna let you talk about this over there because it's true, and they don't want you to know it." Right, and then they get deep into the anti-Semitic shit, deep into the race IQ shit, deep into Holocaust and now, and then before long, they're convincing these kids that they're the descendants of like Vedic gods and shit like this. These people are like ridiculous, right? Like they way down the rabbit hole.
Bam.
So you need to deal with them because they're the ones that are converting the others.
Bam.
You don't, because if you're anyone engaging in a Discord server is already like stage 3. I'm saying that like
Damn.
like before.
Damn.
Okay, baby.
Speaking
All
of
right,
facts.
good.
I'm just saying
Okay,
that, like,
man.
actual like the average human being, like engagement with topics is not to the level like it feels weird because it becomes like one of those like touch grass things. Like the average human being's engagement with these issues is not that. I'm just
Come on,
Bam.
we know the forbidden apps are way worse than Discord.
Bam.
That's
So
the like.
Bam. There's two things that I see as like kind of an issue. Right? So the first one is you said, well, just present the facts, right? And I think there's a great quote by is it Dickinson? No, geez, I can't remember his name right now. But anyways, there are lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics, right? Like which facts which facts you
Mark
choose
Twain,
to
I think.
Mark Twain. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like which facts you choose to
yes.
present, right, are very interesting. So like bringing this back into like CRT, for example, right? Like I can, we all know there's 4 numbers that like get you banned here, right? Right. 2 separate 2-digit numbers automatically racist, right? FBI statistics, right? But then no one wants to talk about 60% incarceration rate, right? That's a different statistic, and that statistic tells a different story, right? So like which statistic you choose to highlight, which fact you choose to present often informs the narrative that you're speaking, and people will look for the statistics and the facts that separate them. The second
but just engaging with what you said, just with CRT, without even forming an opinion. Like if someone's about to watch a CRT video, you can easily say CRT is a legal lens built to discuss like where race and law mix, founded by insert person here, and that's what I'm saying. Like it doesn't have to form an opinion; it just has to tell you like this is what it actually is. This is what
CRT
is.
automatically has an opinion.
and-
There's no such thing as
and-
like just facts in that, right? It's biased by the onset because it has an opinion that like we need critical consciousness.
We gotta stop talking
I
about the
don't-
CRT shit in
Yeah, I
2023.
don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand. What
We
that is. I
we
feel like
will
you
when
did
you
the
fucking commies shut up and go away.
I feel like
I'm
you
not
did
fucking
this-
communist, you dumbass. Like,
Yeah,
the
I
fuck?
don't understand. Yeah, I feel like you didn't engage with anything I just said because all I did was describe what something is. I didn't say whether it was good or bad. I didn't say whether it was useful or not. This is what it is. And then when you cut on the video, like then you like the ad ends and the video comes on, and then someone says CRT is when you take the kids and you whip them in the classroom.
You do a disclaimer and,
then
you move
can
on.
say like, oh, okay, that doesn't match up to what this is supposed to actually like what that previous thing said. The previous thing didn't say whether
I
it was
don't give
good
a
or
fuck.
bad.
I don't give a fuck what critical pedagogists and critical theorists use as a shield for their evil fucking ideology. What I'm saying
amazing.
is that you can
sorry,
use
we're done
one
with stage 4.
statistic.
Okay, Bam,
It's not stage 4. I just
it
understand this
sounds-
shit.
It sounds like he's like
what
literally
I'm
just,
saying-
like, making
what-
up
what
CRT
I'm-
to what it wants. No, we got to move on.
Yeah.
Oh,
Gotta
you have more
inoculate
time.
and
You have more
protect
time
your
to talk later.
It's
We
9:30.
gotta go. Ico, and Lactoid.
Yeah,
What
Bam,
about
I will
me at
engage
some
with
point?
what you said because
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry. Corey.
yeah. So look, I mean, I think that what Doobie's talking about with these are people that we call motivated reasoners who have like gone really deep into this stuff, and you're never going to change their minds with this stuff. pre-bunking stuff. But what you're going to do is you're going to make the ground around them less fertile if they know where some of this is coming from and what is motivating some of this reasoning. So your target, just like a lot of people in panels like this, aren't trying to convince other panelists so much as they're trying to convince chat of whatever it is that their perspective is. It's the same way, as you want people to know that like these are the reasons why people believe what they believe on this particular topic. This is what NASA eventually settled on when they started addressing this stuff. So as an illustration for this, I do teach a geocentrism topic, not so much a flat earth topic, but a geocentrism like unit for debate, where we get to go sort of deeper into debate theory.
So you're saying you're part of the problem?
The reason we do it is because geocentrism does, like Doobie's about this. Geocentrism does have it's a working model. You can like farmers can like
Joe
make
Lewis
their
gets so
planting
mad if I
predictions
tell a
based
better
on it,
joke
like
than
sailors
him.
can use
It's
it to
kind of
navigate
funny.
the world, and they have in the past. Like it works as a model, and it makes good and valid predictions. And so it's not a question of whether or not it can be accurate in terms of doing these things. It's a question of the simplicity of the model. Like, because if you're going to make certain predictions, you're going to get very, very elaborate in your explanations of how they work. You get epicycles in your orbits. You get like galaxies that are far away traveling much faster than the speed of light in order to orbit the Earth once every 24 hours. Like things go crazy. But it still makes valid predictions. Like the math still works and all of that. It's the same thing with different models of physics. Newtonian physics is often better than Einsteinian physics because it's easier to calculate. So we talk about that
because it's right,
and that can explain 80 to 95% of what they like run into on the internet and when people are trying to prove geocentrism, and it makes them harder to convince. But it doesn't persuade any of these motivated reasoners at all. Like that's not what it's designed to do. It's just designed to give like the people, everybody else, at least a couple of steps further, and make it that much harder to sort of like spread something. It gives it a resistance in the atmosphere that surrounds it.
I wanted to support something that Scott just said with a personal example. In high school, we were taught all sorts of things about the violence of the colonizers against the Native Americans. This was brought up consistently, okay? And there was absolutely like, although everything that was said was true, right? They brought up all the battles, they brought up the attacks, they brought up the reservations, they brought up the Trail of Tears, they brought up all this stuff. While all of that was not incorrect, I could, if I was a teacher, I could control my students' worldview and shift it to a specific narrative by simply omitting other realities, right? Not necessarily lying about anything, but just omitting things. So when I went to university, I had a perception that the natives were all very friendly people who just got clobbered by these genocidal Spanish maniacs. And then I had, I guess, a more in-depth education about, the history of the New World, specifically the Aztec Empire and the Incan empires, how incredibly brutal and like enslaving they were, how most of the army that actually defeated the Aztecs were surrounding native tribes that had unified with the Spanish because the Aztecs were so incredibly brutal and just like a horrible, from every kind of moral standard we'd hold today, one of the worst empires ever.
I was trying so hard not to say savage.
By moral standards, they were equivalent to Nazi Germany, or some of these like incredibly super evil things that we think of. But I had no idea because I was never taught that. I was only taught one side of the narrative, right? And so I went in believing a narrative, and that shattered my worldview. And it also led me to have this sort of, well, why the fuck wasn't I taught about that? Why was that left out? And I think this kind of emphasizes one of the problems that we have, or I guess I'm predicting I'm going to have with the pre-bunking stuff on Google. Because again, even if what they're doing is factually accurate, if you only do it for one particular narrative and you sort of craft the public perception to aim towards one particular narrative, even if I never lie, and even if all I do is correct misinformation, I can like very predictably make you believe something that is not the full story and is not the full context. And that's literally what happened to me. And so, when Scott was saying that, if you omit certain facts and you correct certain facts, you can control a narrative. That's 100% true. And we can't just pretend that anytime you correct misinformation or anytime you add context, that there isn't some kind of motivation underneath it, and that motivation isn't always directly biased.
So I'm gonna go to Corey, then Doobie. Corey, so I realized I did see your hand previously, right? And no lie, at the same time, I was giving myself a mental pat on the back because like, oh, I don't forget anyone's names anymure. Like I'm pretty good at this now. So I apologize, Corey.
That's
So
okay.
Corey, then Doobie.
We're all human, myself included. Lacto, what you brought up earlier, and like maybe springboarding off of what you just said a little bit, or I'm going to add to it as well. But so basically, you brought up the question earlier in your opening statement. Should we trust companies like Google to do this type of thing? And then later on, you described the type of sort of like actual pre-bunking, not like just a series of facts, but like actually, logical fallacies and things to look out for when it comes to misinformation. And like it's in the prompt as well in terms of like, should a tech company like Google, are they the proper messenger for this? So would you be okay with like pre-bunking happening in schools, like a video just not by Google, but like a video shown to, let's say, students in a media literacy course?
Yes, if it's like I think every student should be taught the logical fallacies, and most frustratingly, this is what I run into the most. I think people need to learn how to understand and engage with a hypothetical, because that is the number one issue I have running into people.
You mean like two schools hypothetical?
How does engaging with a hypothetical connect with media literacy?
So the reason why understanding what a valid hypothetical is because you can make comparisons where even if they are they might seem accurate or they're like have underlying accurate information, the methodology of the comparison is inaccurate. And if you understand what a hypothetical is and you understand what makes a hypothetical valid or what makes a hypothetical invalid, you can tell the difference between, oh no, that's an invalid hypothetical and here's why. Here's the distinguishing factor, right? Captain is to plane as sailor is to boat, and here's why. But if you're getting caught up on something and you can't quite make that connection, like controlling your narrative is going to be a lot easier.
Well, something that I learned when I was in persuasive comm was just the idea that like there's only two things that exist. It's either that the premises are true or the conclusion is faulty, or that one of the premises isn't valid. So like we can do something like that, no? Instead of going down the hypothetical route? I mean, obviously we'd be able to engage with like different sort of ideas and being like, hey, like here's an example of like three premises that equal to a conclusion. One of these premises is faulty. Why is this premises faulty? And then it's like, okay, here are three premises. All three of these are true, but why is the conclusion faulty?
Right.
Something that happens a lot in discussion is that people will just, and this happens on Twitch all the fucking time. You do it, I do it, everybody fucking does it. Where it's like, instead of like actually engaging what people say, because that's the hard part, it's like we just replace a conclusion with another conclusion. And it's like, congratulations, that's not an argument. Where it's like you're gonna have to connect like why something could be true, like three things could be true. Like say like if you believe that like whatever the fuck Fabian said in his cool story earlier was true about CRT, like how, like let's say if those are true, but then the conclusion is faulty. Okay, how is that relationship? Why does the relationship exist? Shit like that. But I guess you're saying like the hypothetical route is like a way to go about that then, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's a way.
Right.
I'm not denying that we can do that way too. I just think like being able to teach students conditional reasoning, which is like the basis for understanding hypotheticals, is important, because otherwise they're gonna have problems grasping principles, right? When somebody says, well, this is the case, if this is the case, and this also, if this is the case, then this must also be the case. If somebody has a difficult time with hypotheticals, they might say,
Thank you
well,
so
but
much,
that's not the
Copy
case, right? But no.
Or even
I didn't ask if that was the case. I asked if that was
Appreciate
the
it. Thank
case.
you so
Right?
much.
Or
And that's
even,
the
like,
number
do
one
some-
issue I run into.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, or we can even do some shit like, I don't want to get like Corey back into. I'm sorry, Corey, I interrupted you. Where it's like you can say some things like you can even just create premises and conclusions. Where it's just like, okay, class, make up a premise that's absolute bullshit, but like present it in a way and structure it in such a way where you
It's
can connect all
logically
three.
valid.
Like
Let's go to Corey because we've been waiting for so long, and then Doobie and Graham.
Yeah, just a couple. And like, so I take your point. Learning how to engage with hypotheticals is super important. And I think, so to bring up, let's say, past panels, I think you got a taste of that and a slight frustration when we were talking about, ADHD medication, and you were bringing up the idea of like, well, how about we just try a different school? And then it's like, how about 2 schools?
Yeah,
and it's
if we had 2 schools, this is a great example. This is a great example of failure to understand conditional reasoning. Thank you.
well, and I was backing you up. How can you imagine 2 schools, side by side? It's like, no, but there's still transportation costs, and but like, yeah, but what about 2 schools side by side? And also what you brought up earlier of like your experience with like providing context. Like,
I don't know this
agree
example.
with you. Like the better the context you can provide, like the better. But at the same time, like a limit, like, we can't teach all of history all the time, right? And a line is drawn somewhere. And so like, how much context do you provide? How much do you zoom out? Because like, just going with your example, you can just go back in time to provide like the full context, and then you really understand all of whatever human behavior in history. But like, that's obviously not realistic.
I think the idea though is that,
let me
like,
respond to that real quick. I want to respond to that specific point.
wanna
Because
add-
real quick, I agree, Corey, that this is the number one pushback I get is, well, you have to draw the line somewhere. And I understand that, but all too often it seems like, well, the line is drawn just before the counter argument, right? There's not enough time to get into why, this doesn't support my narrative, because, well, we only have so much time. So we can only teach these true things that just so happen to line up with this particular narrative that I'm pushing.
I want
That's
to
what I'm concerned about.
yeah. What I
I'm
want to
not
add.
anti-narrative.
After add it quickly, then I want to get the
Yeah, like, so specifically talking about like Native Americans and colonization in South America, like early colonization in the Americas, right? Like, one of the things, for example, is most people have this belief that like Christopher Columbus was a genocidal monster, right? And in a lot of ways, he was, right? But one of the things that they don't teach you at all is that most of the horrific things he's accused of doing were presented without evidence by his political opponent. And the other and one of the other things that they'll
That's
say,
not true.
one of the other things that
at
they'll
all.
say, yeah, it is.
He was literally
One of the
arrested
other
in prison.
one
I mean,
one of the
so give
other
an example.
one
So,
of
like,
the
what's
other one of the
so
other
who-
things
Okay, go for
one
it.
of the other
Go for it,
things
King.
is that they would say that, oh, well, he just allowed people to rape, that like raping of the Native Americans was seen as a positive thing, and yet we have records showing that he cut the hands off of rapists, right? And so it's like a lot of what he did was monstrous, right? But at the same time, there are details that would that make the narrative less strong, and we will just like omit those just to be like, well, this is the fact. And the other thing is, like, there are other positive things we don't talk about. We never mention Bartholomew de las Casas, right? Like, until you get into like a college level
we
or
do
you're
now.
reading on your own.
He
your
was
school now?
explicitly he was explicitly replaced for Christopher Columbus. That's
So we
fine.
talk about, all right, well, fucking, it
Yeah.
didn't, I must be old because it didn't happen when I was a kid.
No
If
shit,
they're talking
Joe.
about
Your kid will know.
Bartholomew de las Casas, you know what? Fucking base,
Mhm.
because I love that guy.
Okay,
But-
I don't know anything about him, so I'd like to learn. All right, let's go to GB, then Griffin. Bam, you want to get in? All right.
I think that so we can acknowledge that you can definitely like indoctrinate somebody into an ideology by only teaching them certain facets of history, right? So I think Lato's example is a really good one. This idea that the Native Americans were like peace-loving hippies that hug trees all day. They were like forest druids, basically. Another really good example of how this is I think really impacted the United States, at least, is the way that I went to high school in almost 20 years ago, right? I graduated in 2006. Fuck you guys, I'm not old. But I went through all that, right? And didn't learn shit about African empires, right? I learned nothing about them. I didn't learn that until I got curious, and I went into deep dive by myself, watching documentaries, reading books about ancient sub-Saharan African empires like the Kushites or the Songhai Empire or the Ghanaians or the Mali or the Kingdom of Nri, the conquest of Egypt, right? I thought that the Wiwas Kangs thing with the pharaohs, I thought that was a joke, but it's true. The Kushites did conquer Egypt for 200 years. There were black pharaohs. That was a thing that happened. But I knew nothing about this because I just didn't learn it in school. Right, the history that I learned of Africa was one of being enslaved and oppressed and attacked, and that was their entire. I learned that they were enslaved by us in the West. They were oppressed during apartheid, and all that happened to them throughout history was they were the victims, and that was it, right? And I've met a lot of people, who legitimately believe today that Africa is all mud huts in fucking nomadic tribes. Right, chasing around lions and shit. People who believe that African empires just didn't exist. That Africans never had a civilization there of their own, and this is
You
why
know,
it was
black
okay.
people believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why they were conquered, because they just had no civilization, they had no kingdoms, no empires, nothing. Which is, it's really fucking sad, right? It's just I mean, we've gotten to this is like one of the reasons like the Disney like whitewashing thing bothers me so much, right? It's because there are a lot of stories to tell right there that just aren't told.
We've all talked about this. Yes.
Yeah.
We all agree.
So I think that I think we need to be aware of something like that Griffin said earlier, right? Where we're also not learning that side of history in schools these days, or at least they didn't when I was growing up. And that can obviously affect the way that people think of Africa or Africans or black people.
Let's go to Griffin, Bam, and then Corey. Corey will be next after that. Griffin, please.
Okay, so I have like a big question for Lactoid. I guess is my main point for raising my hand here. So, two things. Thing number one, I want to know, how do you say your perception of like colonialism and like Native American culture and things of that nature? How was that changed from your initial introduction to it in elementary school and then your later revelations in college? That kind of leads to the second point, which loops back around into the main topic. So I want you to paint me a very big picture.
So I had an incredibly, kind of like Doobie said, like I had incredibly warped understanding of like white people compared to Native American people. That like the Native Americans were forest druids who were just living their peaceful life, and then these fucking white people came in and destroyed everything. When in reality the situation was much more complex, and that this idea that colonization was this demonic evil on par with the Holocaust, given the context of the situation, might not be true, and might not be true in every instance. And there might be some instances in which colonization was a good thing, and there might be some instances in which it's a bad thing. But that's actually something that you have to analyze on a case-by-case basis, and not just they're all forest druids and these evil white people came in and killed everybody.
Wait.
Yeah, I've spoken to people here on Prime's panel who believe that. Wait 1 second. Who believe that Native Americans didn't have weapons, and it didn't scalp people before the white people got here. Like that's the level of like silliness we're at.
Yeah, let's stop. Wait, Griffin's trying to say something. What the fuck?
Oh, thank you, Joe. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now I have 3 fucking questions. Jesus Christ. So you answered my first one, great. Second question: can you, in any reasonable fucking situation, point to me where colonization was a good thing for the people?
Yeah, it ended the mass slavery, rape, and pillaging of all the surrounding tribes of the Aztec Empire.
Do you have an example of a tribe that was captured?
Wait.
The Tlaxcalans. The Tlaxcalans, specifically.
Stop. So you would say that it was a good thing that they directly stopped engaging in
Got
violence,
him!
even though as a consequence of their
shit.
European contact, they immediately all died of like fucking European-born diseases?
So
You
they
don't
didn't
think- That happened
immediately all die. I mean, there was
Okay.
European-born diseases, but there was also people
Wait, so over the course of
survived and are mixed with the Europeans. This is why.
So
Mexicans
wait, come on now, mate. So were the Native American cultures around there? Was their population not reduced around like things like 85% or somewhere?
97.
Well,
97%.
so the Aztecs, the Aztecs were, yes. It differs by tribe. I agree with you. Smallpox was absolutely devastating. Sure. But
So-
again, when we're talking about, but again,
It's mostly shit like measles.
Yeah,
That's
so it
the
was measles.
direct-
It was primarily smallpox. But Griffin, we're talking about before germ theory, and we're talking about like
It
intentional
doesn't
action.
matter. No.
It does matter because we're talking about like some kind of moral like question here, and we're talking about whether or not this was there's some kind of moral reprehension on behalf of the colonizers in every regard,
Or
and the
just
colonized
nature.
in every regard, right?
Oh.
Like the reality, sometimes people get sick and they don't, and especially before germ theory, they don't know what's happening, right? People didn't know that you could spread
Right.
smallpox. People didn't know what smallpox was when the Spanish landed on. They had miasma theory. They thought it was caused by bad smells. They're idiots, right? Because the Catholic Church, the institution, spread that misinformation.
It was Aiko's fault. Do you have any more thing else, Griffin? And then I'll go to Bam and Corey.
Yeah, just final thing. I'll digress from the colonization thing. I don't think I'll get the clear answer I'm looking for here. The real thing I want to
Ciceronian
ask you is
digression.
anyway.
Sorry, go ahead.
So fucking Christ, I can't keep my composure here. So how would you, because we agree that we don't think that Google and other large conglomerate corporations are great arbiters for objectiveness when it comes to properly disseminating what could be in quote misinformation, right? How would you have spoke to yourself as a younger person, let's say in elementary school or wherever you learned about your initial introduction to colonization, how would you have spoke to yourself to build a more quote unquote fair picture of colonization?
I would have told myself that everything that you're going to be taught, regardless of the political position, everything that you're going to be taught as a child, somebody has some kind of underlying reason to be teaching you this. Somebody wants you to have a narrative and somebody wants you to believe something. And so approach everything with skepticism, even the things that seem, well, of course, right? There is no of course. There's a reason why they're teaching that.
It's really good, actually.
Meta narratives, if you will.
Yeah. Let's go to Bam and then Corey, please.
I think just saying that, I just think saying that isn't super, at least to the broader society, isn't super useful. I don't like saying there's a narrative, there's a bias. I think humans who are forever biased. I think everything that we'll ever like engage in will have some type of narrative, and I don't think that inherently is a bad thing. There's, at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in the school day, and I don't know. Well, actually, I was gonna jump to a universally bad example, but that might not be the case anymore. I think that when we teach about Hitler, like if my kid comes home and he says, "Oh yeah, Hitler was a bad guy," like I'm not gonna say like, "Wait a minute, they're not properly engaging you. We have to learn about his art. We have to they've got a
right. He was a very good socialist. The TB vans, factory beautification. The bad guys always start off as very good socialists.
But you're joking. But this is what you're advocating for. You're saying that we shouldn't be able, we should never be able to just teach things with the general conclusions.
Literally nobody advocated for that.
That's exactly what you're advocating for. That's what you and Lacto has been spent the last 30 minutes talking about the idea of narrative equals bad. That was just my first position. So it's
lies. Nobody advocated for that.
Goddamn.
So that's one thing. I think the idea of understanding that sure there can be narratives to things that we teach at school, but that's not inherently problematic. Number two, I think the idea of oh my goodness, it was something that Doobie had said.
You should probably shoot that person in chat, by the way, Prime. He's saying some cool things. But anyway.
But yeah, I think that the way that the expectations we have for broader society at the end of the day can't be. No, never mind. I'll come back to it. Fine.
Okay. Are you sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Did anyone want to respond to them? And then we'll go to Corey. Corey, I forgot about you. Did anyone want to respond to it?
Quick response. Again, sort of there's not enough time in the day. I understand, but again, it just seems so convenient that this is always drawn once the narrative is completed. And this is kind of why I would want to tell myself everybody's trying to teach you a narrative, because then that might encourage younger me to actually question everything and to go out and do research on this stuff on my own time. Another example is throughout my entire high school time, I was fully educated in how the justice system was racist against Black people, specifically in the fact that Black people were more likely to be incarcerated. It wasn't until college that I knew there was any difference in crime rates between racial groups. I just didn't know it. I didn't believe it. Isn't that important when we're talking about incarceration? One is directly linked to the other.
Did you want to engage with us there, or did you just want to give another example?
So the reason I'm giving the example is because I think that would be a good litmus test for the kind of things I'd want to change, which is if you're leaving out some critical context that directly relates to what you're saying, that's a no-no. But if we're talking about so again, there needs to be a judgment call here at some point. Hitler's art, maybe that's not super important to go into with him as an historical figure. But when we're talking about people being thrown in prison, the reasons for that's directly critical. That's directly linked.
I mean, first of all, that's on the K through 12 education. That's something that we barely engage in the first place, the idea of criminal justice and reform. But even the idea of saying that there's a different rate, this isn't a conversation about systemic racism, but the history behind that. But I think that piece of information, there's different rates. I don't think that changes.
I think this. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you good.
I think this is more what this highlights, right? More is a problem of education system teaching people what to think as opposed to how to think. I think, a great book that everybody should read. It's a article. It's difficult to read, right? And Sterner Nights, I don't know where you are, but maybe you'll get some love now, is The False Principle of Our Education by Max Sterner, right? When we were transitioning into kind of the modern education system from the kind of the classical education system. And one of the things is that because we're given a base amount of knowledge, right? These historical facts, this level of competency in literature, these, math principles, and some of that is really good, but like what we should be doing more is less standardize the curriculum so that we all can be tested on these exact specific facts. And hey, we're in history, we're talking about the Native Americans, we talk about this a little bit. Now I want you all to go and read a history book and do a report on the things that you learned and write about these things. And then as a class together, we'll learn about different things that are there. And then the teacher sits there and goes, well, I don't know that that's necessarily accurate. And maybe there's even a little bit of back and forth discussion about it, as opposed to these are the facts. Everyone knows these facts, and those facts kind of tell a story in and of themselves.
Argue why that's better. Like
because it teaches people how to go out and learn themselves.
No. Like Fabian,
running from it.
Fabian,
I'm not running from it.
Oh, sorry. In your own premise, you're skipping about like 30 steps. It's like, sure, you can have people pick a topic that they want to do for their paper, but it's the teacher's job to guide them through the very principles I was talking about earlier. Like, okay, how do you know a source is a good source? How do you check a source? How do you like reinforce your primary sources with secondary sources? How do you not fall for sensational headlines that lead to misleading information? Like, these things can be taught alongside people as they're building their paper, but once you get to the end of it and just like they hand in the paper and they say, oh, there's a fallacy here, there's a fallacy there, like, no, that's shitty teaching. Like, you have to make sure that like as you're working on these,
you're adding things that I don't disagree with, and then being like,
right,
here's
but
why
the
you're
thing
wrong.
is that
I agree with what you just said. Like, what are you talking about?
I'm just saying that you just skip steps, which is gonna will probably like help clarify Bam what he's saying, especially if you agree.
I mean,
there are also people who think that like,
obviously you need to know those things in order to write a good paper.
There's some people who don't believe that, Fabian. That's why I clarify.
But that's not even my perspective is because again I said something, then everybody like y'all jumped out like no, I don't agree with that, and I'm asking again because you keep standing on the exact same position as before. Why is it better to give no perspective, to give no guidance into opinions?
Okay,
like because it sounds
saying,
on his face like, oh, we don't like. Oh, I want people to form, but like if a child seems to be like,
I'm not avoiding. I think you're misunderstanding, right? Like, I don't think that it is inherently evil, and thus we must remove all bias from everything, because humans have bias, right? Any standard education is going to have bias, especially if it's done by the state. It's going to be a pro-state narrative, right? But no matter what, like, that's going to be there. And what's important is to recognize that and to reinforce the skills of people to be able to engage in research on their own and formulate their own opinions and create someone that is a learner, a thinker, someone that is intellectually curious, as opposed to creating a standard model to fit to a specific bias that is being taught.
Again,
Fabian, how do you? So like, I'm sorry.
I got to move on. We're limited by time. Corey, please.
Well, actually, I think I'm just going to expand on this topic. So Lactoid, earlier you brought up, as well as Doobie, sort of like your personal experience of where, like, I think it was like in high school, basically like, whatever. The primary principle of like, the history that you learn colors your worldview. I think that's a fair statement to say. Or maybe in your case, like the lack of history that you learned also colored your worldview until, you took it upon yourself, or you took like a more advanced level course. And so like that being the case, so did you take, for example, like a history of China course in high school?
No.
Do you think that like colors your worldview as well?
I mean, not now, because I've done a lot of like independent research into China, but I 100% agree that high schoolers probably don't know jack shit about China on average.
Yeah, as in like, so I agree with you that greater, like that's where it gets really tricky. Like, so like, just as you said, like what you leave out matters. And do you think it potentially matters, especially when, let's say public opinion of certain countries, like if you're not teaching that history, and I would agree that overall, like, let's say the example that Doobie brought up was like history of Africa, probably like useful. And definitely it appears to have affected Doobie's like worldview and provided more context. And so don't you think maybe like the lack of history of China education maybe like also shapes public opinion?
So it would be similar. real quick, it'd be similar to like if they only taught one thing about China, and that was like the Tiananmen Square massacre, and that was it. We didn't go into whatsoever into anything else. People's perceptions of China might be very like biased and not context driven at that point. I would just be in favor of not teaching anything about China at that point.
Well, don't you think that also like has an effect as well in terms of like, again, you're leaving out something like and I would argue probably just like, well, like of the whatever noteworthy contemporary events, historical events, like I think most people in the United States are aware of Tiananmen Square and that shape, and only that about China.
Well, but Corey,
and that shapes their public opinion.
But like you said, right, there's only so much time to go into something, and so if we're gonna just teach like an incredibly biased, one-sided, like without the counterpoint, I would almost prefer, well, let's just like instead of spending time doing that, let's just spend time like getting a more context, like full understanding and like critical thinking driven understanding of context that we can actually spend time on. That's what I would argue for.
Yeah, but you brought up the example of like basically like I guess Aztec history and all that stuff. Like I see no reason why that like I totally agree that based off of how you describe it, it seems like super useful and added more context. But you said you put it as a criticism towards like the education that you received in high school, and I don't really see as in I would say then the lack of history of China also is a criticism to what's taught in high school as well. Then,
if they taught only like one specific like political angle about China, or like the Soviet Union or whatever, and I like came out of high school very dogmatically believing one thing, that's what I'm against, right? I would just prefer no education as opposed to that kind of education.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.